The ripples of India's escalating COVID-19 situation is very much felt here, especially for the hundreds of Singapore residents who fear for their loved ones in India.
Among them are Pulak Rishi and his wife. Both their parents tested positive. Pulak joins us now to share more. Welcome to the show, Pulak. Pulak, tell us more about what your family is going through in Uttar Pradesh. We know the healthcare system there and in other parts of India is overwhelmed.
Yep, and unfortunately for both me and my wife, both our parents tested positive all around the same time. And maybe 20, 30 people from our extended families as well, right? So it's almost like everyone got tested positive together. And that was definitely not a very good thing for us or for them they had to take care of their own situation as well as hearing the news about others was not a very pleasant experience either for them. What sort of worsened the situation was the current state of the infrastructure, as I'm sure everyone knows through the news, where there's sort of shortage of supplies of doctors, medicines, hospitals, and so on. So those are the kind of things which sort of added stress to the situation. And last thing we wanted was our parents themselves to worry about these kind of logistical things, and we wanted them to sort of just focus on their health and rest and take medicines and so on. But unfortunately, that didn't ended up being the case. So at least, let's say in my case, out of 4 of our parents, my mother was worse of the lot in terms of the severity of the symptoms. So suddenly when the oxygen levels started dropping, we were sort of in a panic mode to start sourcing oxygen and so on. And it coincided with the worst of the times with the infrastructure, right? So we made hundreds of calls from here, contacted almost everyone we knew. So many of the people whom we knew themselves had COVID, so they were not in a particularly good situation to help either. But somehow, going through a lot of these calls and messages and coordinating through multiple parties, we somehow managed to secure at least the essentials at home. But there was still a lot of uncertainty in terms of what happens next. Do we have to get admitted to a hospital tomorrow? Would our oxygen supply last till the next day? And so on and so forth. So those definitely were not very pleasant experiences. And as I said, in the absence of many other people being around to do running around on the ground, my father, who himself has tested positive, luckily he doesn't have severe symptoms. He himself had to do some of the running around to the medicine shops, going to the oxygen guy, and so on and so forth. So these kind of incidents, of course, has taken a toll on both, I'm sure, their mental health, our mental health, and so many others. Yeah.
Right. Pulak, how are you and your wife coping, not being able to care for your parents and your relatives in person?
Yeah, and this is again something which has been bothering us a little bit over, especially the last 2 weeks. So far over the last 1 year, it didn't reach this stage that we had to think that, okay, do we now really need to go back? Do we need to just simply pack up our bags and book the next flight home and be there with them? But at the same time, we are conscious that if we go and we ourselves contract COVID, it would be an even worse situation, right? So we had to make the hard decision of not going unless it becomes a very emergency situation, and we would try to do our best from here, which has its upside and downside. Upside being that I think to some extent it helps us act in a slightly more rational way. We can take at least a few hours a day to sort of de-stress and maybe watch some brain-dead TV. I'm personally watching Indian Premier League, which happens to be at the same time for cricket. And of course, work, both of us are working full-time. So, these kind of things are keeping us busy, at least for those few hours a day, and keeping our mind off the constant sort of negative news and situation back at home. At the same time, if we were there, many of these logistical challenges that I mentioned, especially running around and getting things done, talking over phone to all the local sort of delivery guy and the medicine guy and so on and so forth, those kind of things would have definitely been we would have been able to manage much better. And most importantly, I think if let's say hypothetically we were at home, I think the biggest contribution we could have done is being there sort of emotionally for all our parents, right? Because they are also now in almost complete lockdown. And so many of the family members also have COVID. So, I mean, I'm sure they are also, it's playing at the back of their mind 24/7. So we are doing a lot of calls, video calls, and calls with extended families and so on to keep that positive vibe going and so on. Yeah.
Right. Pulak, do you have anything you'd like to share with other residents here who are also in your situation, similar situation, fearing for the loved ones in India?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, first thing which I can probably advise after going through this experience is don't panic, right? Try to take certain rational decisions, even though sometimes it can become hard. And there would likely be one of these two situations for you. Either everyone is in your family safe, no one has symptoms, right? In which case, try to follow all the sort of awareness that all the protocols that have been prescribed, safe distancing, masking up, staying at home, and so on, and just try to prevent any such situation from happening, right? So that is the first thing. And I know many of our folks back home will end up saying, oh, no, situation here is different. You guys are not here, but we really need to actually go out and do these things. But I think especially during this peak period, we have to convince them otherwise and just almost force them to just stay at home and take all the precautions.
We wish you and your family all the very best.